I started praying the rosary because I was having like mild panic attacks at work. This was right before the twins were born. And I wasn't having any fun. I was stressed. Work was my life. And I started praying the rosary because that was the prayer I remembered. It was the only thing I knew to do that I could do that I'd learned from childhood. And I wish I could say I loved the rosary growing up. I didn't, but I'm really glad that my parents taught me to pray the rosary because I knew the prayers. I didn't have to go learn them. And so I started praying the rosary every day on my way to work out loud, fingers on the steering wheel. And I started praying for the things around me to get better and change, work to change, family stuff to change. Right. And what happened instead was I started to change.
What's good, fatherhood? Rob Bill here, coming to you with Uncommon, the Dad Work Podcast, episode 70, maybe, or something like that, with a very special guest to me because his crafts are in my hands every single morning. Mr. Jonathan Conrad, husband and father of 3 boys, and founder of Catholic Woodworker. So happy.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Great to be with you.
Mm-hmm. I'm so happy to have you here, man. This rosary has changed everything for me. And within the first week, I had prayed on it more times than I had praised the rosary in my entire life before that, growing up cradle Catholic. And part of it is being called back to him, but the other part is that this thing's just awesome. We were talking about something that really was near and dear to my heart right before this. And you were talking about how highly intentional you are with your business and the impact that you want to have over the next 3 months, 3 years, 10 years. And you had a moment of realization that maybe you weren't being as intentional at home. Can you bring me back into that?
Yeah. So that is the realization I had over the last probably 2-3 months, exactly the way you stated it. And it didn't feel great to come to that realization because when you realize that you're doing better at work than you are at home, you're like, that's not really, it's good that work's going well, but that's not my number one responsibility. Like providing financially for my family is not my number one priority. There are much higher priorities as far as what my wife and my children need from me. I have 3 boys, what they need from me, and money's on that list somewhere, right? But like once you pass the basic necessities, my time and my intentional time with them is way more important than what I bring home. And it's not like I didn't care. It was just this realization that I kind of had made some, I don't know, incorrect assumptions, or just I didn't do that. I wasn't always intentional with work either. So I learned this thing at work out of necessity because I wasn't doing a great job of providing. And I came to the realization that it's working. And now that I'm seeing the fruits of it, I'm like, I need this in my personal life because I have these big goals and big dreams for the kind of dad and the kind of, husband I want to be. And I'm not getting there. And I've had a lot of them for a very long time, and a lot of them don't feel like they're making any progress. And the reality is they're not, because I'm not actually working towards them in a concrete, intentional way. And so I would say I've begun the process of carving out time for strategy. I've learned that as a CEO of a business, my number one priority, my number one job is not working in the business, keeping the business running. It's protecting my time to work on vision and strategy for the more distant future, and making sure that the work we're doing today is going to get us to where we're trying to go in several years. But in order to do that, you got to set time aside for the strategy time of designing and planning and organizing. And I wasn't doing that. And I was making up a whole bunch of excuses of why I wasn't doing the things that I wanted to do. And it really came down to because I haven't taken the time to build a plan around it. It's like if I want my kids to learn how to golf, I can't just go to the driving range and just have them whack balls. And I know that, but I got to spend some time and put together some kind of structure around that if I want them to actually make progress there.
Mm-hmm. All right. What were some of the excuses that you realized were in your head?
The first one would be I'd blame them. Like they don't have the drive and it's their fault. And it was, that's really embarrassing to admit out loud. I don't think it was a conscious, intentional excuse. It was more like a self defense. Where if I'm accusing myself, yeah, well, they don't want to learn how to ride bikes. It's like, well, turns out that wasn't actually true. They were scared to ride bikes. And once I got them bikes in an area where they felt safe to ride them, that problem went away real fast. So it was really that I didn't like being uncomfortable in a situation where I'm trying to get them to do something they don't want to do that's good for them. And it's like, that wasn't really their problem. That was my problem.
Yeah.
And then I think there's other scenarios where honestly, again, maybe subconsciously where you want to blame your wife. Like, oh, well, that should be her job. And it's like, that's a really lousy excuse because typically these are areas like my strength areas of like, I love adventure. And I would say like I was pretty good at sports. So it's like adventure and athletics and music are kind of my strong suit. And it was easy for me to say, well, it's like, my wife has the family calendar, like she manages the calendar. So really need her to prioritize this. It's like, again, not, that doesn't serve anybody. If it's something that I'm passionate about, that I want for them, why would it be anybody's responsibility other than mine to make that thing happen? It's my vision. Um, and the crazy thing is like, there isn't a single thing that I have pursued that's good for me or the family that my wife hasn't fully supported. Right. But it's like, I can't expect her to like take ownership of something, take ownership of my vision. It just doesn't work that way. I figured it out I figured out in business first that if I have this vision for the business, it's my responsibility to make sure my team I get their buy-in on the vision. If I want that thing to be successful. And it's more than just buy-in. There has to be some form of a plan of how are we going to get from A to B, or it's really A to like F or G or further down, right? Because it's not just one little step we're talking about. It's multiple steps to get to where you're going. Um, so I think those are the two. They're basically one, blaming other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's embarrassing to admit, but it's pretty common. Because if you believe the lie that it's somebody else's fault or somebody else is the reason why there's an obstacle, like, well, I would except for this. And I think I've even made excuses around like, well, I can't do that because I don't have the money for it. And there might be some truth to that, but it's also possible that I don't have the money for it to do it the way that I want to do it. Or and there's probably other ones, but those are the ones that jump to my mind
Yeah,
immediately.
there's some resistance to me spending that money in that way. Maybe I have it, but there's some resistance to it.
For me,
Yeah,
it's
my
usually the other way of like, I don't have a problem spending money. So it's more so I want to spend money on the thing. And it's easy to say, well, I can't because I don't have the money. And you realize like you don't actually need the money. Like if you go back to the golf example, I want to buy them nice clubs, but one of them hasn't ever played golf before. He doesn't need nice clubs yet. That's not going to be the thing that holds him back. So I went to Play It Again Sports and got a set for like $70.
yeah.
And it's like I have $70 and we can go to the driving range and he doesn't have to be a pro, which kind of gets into the other, when you get past the excuses, then you kind of get into the what you're protecting yourself from, which is failure. I'm like, well, I don't want to do that because if we go and he's not any good, I'm going to feel bad about myself. And I don't like feeling bad about myself. And so I'm going to avoid this because I actually don't think I'm going to be successful in helping him learn how to play golf.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that feeling. So I go do something else that I'm
Yeah.
good at that I can control, like working.
Yeah. Work is, I think that we're becoming more aware of it, but work is one of the biggest copes. Just pouring yourself back into work, and it takes you away in a sneaky way from the things that actually matter. And you were talking about your sons with bikes, and my son's 5, and we got him a big boy bike. It's a big bike. It's a little bit taller than it needs to be, but also he's going to grow. So he can't get on it by himself yet, but he can ride it and he can hop off of it. And he was rocking at it until I harassed him a little bit because he can get off one side really easily, but the other side, for some reason, he prefers to jump off of it. So if we're riding and we don't have sidewalks where I'm at in Lake Zurich, if we're riding and he needs to get off his bike, he will like launch himself into the grass. And if there's a car coming by, like they'll stop and be like, "Is he okay?" And I'm like, "Oh, he's
Nope,
fine. It's just
he
what he
didn't
does."
fall. That was just his
Yeah,
exit.
he just that's what he does. And he gets up and he's like, "I meant to do that." Yeah, you good, buddy. But then I gave him a hard time about it. I was like, "Why don't you like put your foot down? Because it's easier on that side versus the other side, just like you do on the other side." And since then, he hasn't wanted to ride his bike. And so when we go on family walks, I'm like, "But just take your bike with, buddy." And he's like, "No, I don't want to." And I'm like, "Well, just bring it with." And then I get frustrated because I want him to do it my way, like you were talking about. But what he needs for me is to create some open space and time just to totally be with him, not on a family walk, and just be like, "Hey, buddy, let's ride today. Where do you want to go? Can we do it at your pace?" And it's the same thing that you were talking about. Is I need to be really intentional with coming to where he's at with it, instead of trying to force him into my mold, instead of outsourcing it to him and putting that responsibility on him and projecting it onto him. There's responsibility I can take around it too. So I think it's easy for us to make that mistake.
Yeah.
If we can
And
really,
I think let's say what I'm learning is that me personally, I would say I'm generally wired towards outcomes. Uh, and so when I'm trying to help them, it's like, I know that this outcome is good for you. If I get too lost in the outcome, then I can't be present for them in whatever they're really like feeling like, because typically I'm afraid of something. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of getting hurt. I mean, riding a bike, the primary fear is I'm afraid of falling off this bike and, hitting my face in the concrete and getting hurt. And if you don't give them space to, like, if you don't create space to wrestle with that with them, and they're not naturally wired towards like adventure and chaos, because not every kid is, then you're you're missing an opportunity to walk, like not try and bury the fear, but like walk with them through it to the other side, however long it takes. It's like, okay, if you're too afraid to get on the bike and ride on your own, what about getting on the bike and riding it where I'm holding onto your shirt the whole time?
mm-hmm,
Okay. Well, what if this? And you do have to still push them. But at least what I've learned where I've been successful is pushing them just past where they're comfortable. It's like, okay, I want you here, but clearly you're like the gap is too far. So what about this? What about this? And then there's an element of reinforcement. And this is what I know, that I know this to be true, not because I'm good at it, but because I've learned the hard way that when I'm not this way, it doesn't work. So the way that I need to be better at is the consistency. of if I show up for them every day, every week, whatever I've committed to, I'll have more opportunities to push them a little bit farther each time. And it's really on me kind of, it's like if I know that this is a good thing for them, I'm basically their coach. And especially if they haven't bought into this being good for them, I've got to show up consistently and push them every day if I want to help them get over some obstacle. And I don't have to push them that hard if I make a commitment that 15 minutes a day for the next 7 days, I'm going to say, hey, let's go outside and ride bikes. Fortunately for me, they learned when they were like 6 or 7. They both had kind of like a scary moment. These are the younger two. And they kind of wrote it off as like, nope, I'm not doing that again. And I didn't really try again until we just moved to a new neighborhood where there's way less traffic. The streets are wider, there's sidewalks, and we have a big driveway. And I was like, this is the perfect time. So I had worked up in my head like this is going to take forever. This would be really painful. And I just kept procrastinating. And one day I was just like, get on your bike and go. And they were both like, no. I was like, yes. I was like, I'll hold you if you want me to. At this point, they're 12 though, and they're like, I don't want you to hold. Like, no, I'm not a baby. And so they picked up the bikes and they rode, and like 15 minutes later, they were riding around the neighborhood. And so it was more so that like I had way overestimated in my head how difficult and stressful it would be. And once I had gotten over that, it was like, oh, that wasn't that bad. And I mean, it could have been bad, right? But and that would have been where that consistency comes into play, where if I only do that once and then I don't do it again for a month, I got to start all the way over. And I think that kind of goes back to the planning and the strategy of, okay, if I want to make progress here with my boys in these areas, I've got to come up with a plan and I've got to create time and space for not just the execution, but also the planning and the reflection of how did it go? What do I need to do differently next time? And show up consistently for them and walk them through the process.
Yeah. So how are you bringing those planning principles into the family? We talked about 3-month, 3-year, 10-year plans, but how are you bringing that in?
What it started with was I gave myself a day about a month ago, and I worked on a 10-year plan or a 10-year vision. And I looked at different areas of my life, uh, like emotional, spiritual, physical, and then relational. So it was like husband, father, friend, uh, and then I looked at each of those parts of my life and said, where do I what do I want this part of my life to look like in 10 years? Specifically, things I have control over, right? I didn't have like personal goals for the boys because that's their life, not my life. It's more about what kind of dad do I want to be in that relationship in 10 years? And so I started there and I took a day to work on it, but then I spent the next probably 2 weeks. I use Claude a lot. So I spent the next 2 weeks, every time I had a free minute and I was driving, I would just put Claude audio on and I would I'd ask Claude, talk me through this part of the vision. Cause I don't, it's a little bit wishy washy. And I'm not asking it to make decisions for me. I'm asking it to listen and challenge and ask questions. So sometimes I'll say like, be a critic, right? What's unrealistic about these things? And and so over the course of a couple of weeks, I got like a 10-year kind of personal vision that I liked. I was like, yeah, if I looked like this, if my life looked like this in 10 years, if I was showing up for life this way in 10 years, I'm gonna feel really good about where I'm at. And then you go kind of backwards and say, okay, let's now focus short term of where do I want to be in a year so that if I'm here in a year, then I'm on track to be here in 10 years. And that was a little bit more difficult because that's when you start getting into like rubber hits the road of I've got to actually commit to something concrete. And so one of those things was I need to have planning time for that personal vision every week, where I'm looking at what goals did I set last week? What goals did I set last month? How am I doing against those goals? And so I've carved out time every Friday where I don't have meetings on Friday anymore. So I set aside a couple of hours, and I've only been doing this for a month, but it's already making a huge difference. Because first of all, I had to protect that time. It took me about a month to get to not needing to have meetings on Friday. And then it was, okay, I've got to carve out this time to not do stuff and check boxes, but actually think and reflect and strategize and plan of what am I going to do next month? What am I going to do next week? And kind of split the time between what's going to free up time. So sometimes it's like cleanup work, physically and mentally. Other times it's, okay, what needs to get fixed? Even though I don't want to fix anything, I want to build something new, but I got to maintain the things that I have. Otherwise, they become all of my time. If I'm not taking care of the house, if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm not paying bills, if I'm not maintaining order in my life, then I don't have space for this more strategic work.
So taking that intentional family strategy time on Fridays, reviewing where you were at, what you've done, where you're going. And it sounds like you're using similar life areas to what I like to use, which is health. I put in wealth and profession in there as well, but then relationships, that's friends, marriage, kids, spiritual growth, and looking at, am I growing the ways that I want to in each of those areas? And am I creating the space, the structure for my whole family to be able to grow as well? Awesome, man. I love it. I love that structure. So I want to get into Catholic Woodworker. So can you tell me a little bit about Catholic Woodworker, man? Can you tell us? I know, obviously, I use this
Yeah.
Defender every day.
So the Catholic Woodworker, its origins is really my passion for woodworking. I grew up with a grandfather who worked at Skill Power Tools for like 50 years and like worked on the first power drill. And we would go visit him in the summer, and he had a wood shop in the garage. And in my mind, every time I went there, I would spend all my time in the shop. And that's not really true, but like those are the kind of the core memories that I have. And then similarly, I would spend a lot of my time with my dad and my brother working on home renovation projects for their house growing up. So a combination of the woodworking and then just kind of like the DIY renovation work. I got a lot of exposure to building and creating and designing, and, you know, a lot of engineers in both sides of the family. And so woodworking was something I loved doing. And when we bought our first house, generally you're kind of house poor, and it's like, hey, we want to make some changes and we can't afford to pay people and buy expensive stuff, so let's do it ourselves and build. Um and so it started with home and turned into picture frames, where it's like the easiest thing I could figure out how to do was make picture frames, and that saved a lot of money. That turned into a kind of a side hustle that ended up taking all of my time, where I wasn't spending any time with the family. All of my free time was in the garage. And I wasn't happy, and I wasn't making any money because I was spending all of my money on tools, because I thought that would make me happy, and it did not. And so I took a little bit of time off from that, and I said, okay, if I'm going to keep doing this thing that I'm doing isn't bad in and of itself. But if I'm going to keep doing this thing, it needs to be ordered towards the good of my vocation. And so I changed the name from Conrad Designs to the Catholic Woodworker. And I started kind of did a reset. And I started making a lot of crucifixes because I had a ton of lumber from overbuying on lumber. And so I just started converting scrap wood into crucifixes and giving them away and, you know, let's say adorning my home with crucifixes. And I'd already had a pretty decent following on Instagram back when it was just pictures and not Meta. And and so I started kind of sharing about my faith. I'd take a picture of what I'm working on, but then I'd kind of like tell a personal story. And I think people appreciated the vulnerability and and it was a way of evangelizing. Um and it continued to grow. And at some point, I started making rosaries because my wife had given me a rosary. I loved it. It broke and I was frustrated because I like the rosary, that rosary meant something to me. I didn't want a different one. I wanted that rosary. And so pretty soon after I found some cord at a scouting store and I was like, I bet I could string this thing because it was a chain rosary. And sure enough, I strung it back together and it looked terrible, but I got the job done. And that kind of evolved into me making rosaries. And that is kind of where the business took off. I found myself a couple of years later looking at my wife, who at that time was just moral support saying, what do we do? Because I can't keep up with demand. She's like, well, ask for help. And so she started doing order fulfillment and I would make all the rosaries. And then that wasn't enough. And then I was like, well, same conversation. It was like every 6 months I'd sit down with her and be like, what do we do next? It was like, find some other people to make rosaries. And so we did that. And then that led to hiring full-time staff. So that's kind of, that's the long and short of, where we started and how we got to where we are today.
Tell me about the mission focus.
Yeah. So we found ourselves, we like designing products, right? And our customers really enjoy that too. And so we were always designing new rosaries and we love doing that. We're going to continue to do that. We also found that there was a lot of complexity and potential distraction in doing that when there isn't really a purpose for it other than keep keep designs fresh. We came to a couple of things that we had done late last year that we kind of called mission rosaries, where we worked with brands to design a rosary for a particular mission, or we created a rosary on our own for a particular mission. We're like, well, what if we just pivoted to moving forward? We launch mission rosaries. In other words, we're going to narrow our focus even more. We're going to go from a rosary company to a mission rosary company, where every rosary that we launch is launched with a particular purpose, a mission, in collaboration with a brand or a ministry who has that at the heart of their mission. And once we realized what we were saying, it was unanimous. It was like, yes, because it solves all the problems and it orients us towards what we're trying to do, which is lead people to Jesus through Mary, specifically through the rosary. And because we believe that Mary's going to do a better job than we're going to do. If we can get people to Mary, Mary's going to get them to Jesus. Because that's been everyone that works here, that's been their personal experience, their lived experience. Most of the people that work here kind of came to us like, hey, I want to be part of this thing. Why? Because their lived experience was, I met Jesus through Mary and in particular the rosary. And I want other people to have that experience because it's blessed all of us. And so it was very easy for us to kind of all buy into this idea of let's even narrow it further and say, we're not going to just launch random rosaries. We're going to focus on mission specific rosaries. So we've launched a couple. The biggest one that we've launched this year so far is the St. Francis of Assisi rosary. And this year is, I think it's like the 850th anniversary of Francis of Assisi. And so there's this invitation from Pope Leo, hey, this is a year of St. Francis. And really what that means is this is an opportunity for us to rediscover the spirituality and the virtues that he modeled in his life and grow in those same virtues. And so we didn't just design and launch a Francis Rosary. We wrote 10 articles on his life and the virtues that he modeled. And we wrote a novena focused on peace, starting with interior peace and looking at peace in marriage and relationships and other aspects of our life, recognizing that material peace is not what we're talking. We're talking about interior peace, something that we can only get from Jesus. And it's like that's the simplest way that we could identify with his life and his legacy was that that total detachment from earthly things and complete reliance on and complete trust in God. And the work that we did to bring his life to the forefront and invite people into a relationship or a new relationship with Francis through the content that we put together, paired with that rosary, inviting people to pray for peace, but not just abstract like world peace, where you can kind of pretend to like be a victim of like, oh, I'm praying for world peace because that's the problem with our culture. It's
It's
like,
the
no,
Miss America.
the problem is you personally, not being who God created you to be. Um, Peace starts with us because we have control over us. We don't have control over who the president is and what he's doing, or who's in Congress or the Senate, or even the principal of our own school or our pastor. We have very little control over those things. We have a lot of control over what we're doing.
Can you tell us more, just since we're here, we're talking about St. Francis, tell us about what you maybe remembered about St. Francis and like what really lights you up about St. Francis of Assisi.
He was zealous, and early on he was, I would say, maybe uh, a bit overzealous, right? And there's some charm in that of like, he's in the San Damiano, this decrepit cathedral, or not even cathedral, this chapel that's falling apart, and God's like, rebuild my church, and he's like, oh, and so he basically steals like fabric from his dad, sells it to, or doesn't, eh, eh, you know, basically fire sales it to raise money for rebuilding this church. And he's successful in rebuilding the church, but it's kind of like God's like,
Isn't that so
uh,
often what happens to us?
so I appreciate the humanity of his story, that like he didn't just get it right out of the gate, that he had to learn, hey, stealing for like, God didn't ask me to steal from my dad, first of all. Um, second of all, there's more to it than that. Um, and part of it's rebuilding myself. The beauty of the story is he was human, and we see his humanity in especially the early part of his story. And we see the wisdom in his maturity of recognizing, I am not the kind of leader that my own organization needs. And kind of going deeper into prayer and putting systems and structures in place. I mean, you talk about business leaders are going to tell you that the best businesses build the best systems. He built a system that has lived on for 850 years. It's like, maybe he didn't know anything about business, but he certainly understood the importance of structure, that we need structure. And theirs is, I would say, very extreme from the standpoint of have no possessions. Um, and at the same time, he recognized the virtue in that not everybody is called to literal poverty of having no possessions, right? It's very difficult for us to provide for our families and have no possessions, right? We're not all called to live out to the letter what he was called to live and what he invited other people to live. But there's a lot of goodness in that we can still like, reading through a lot of his rules, a lot of them apply to marriage and family life and relationship when you put it into the context of your vocation. And so it was a fun experience to go through that process. I really, and I'm grateful for his humanity and grateful to to be able to see the journey that he went through to get from where he started to where he got. And I think it's like when you look backwards from the end of his life, looking backwards, you can see the beginnings of him rebuilding God's church by rebuilding man in God's image through the relationships that he formed in the brotherhood. Because he didn't do it alone. He didn't go off in the desert and pray on his own. He didn't, he walked with other men. And so there's a lot that we can learn from that call to be in relationship with others in humility, um, intimate relationships at a masculine level that really challenge us to have compassion for each other, walk with each other, challenge each other, grow with each other. Like that's at the heart of the brotherhood. And there's so much value in that for us as men.
We really need that. We need that. And those of us who have bought into the lone wolf path, and we're sold it real hard over here in the United States, uh, are falling apart. And so I love that.
It feels safer to only be in relationship with people who agree with you, but it doesn't serve us well because eventually you end up realizing that everyone is broken. And if you can't handle that, you're not going to like anybody. And so you either end up in isolation, which a lot of us find ourselves there. And I don't even want to like condemn people for finding themselves in that place. Like I can appreciate how easy it is to get to a point where you are in complete isolation because it's a lot of work to be in relationship with other men. You have to have the time and the space. You have to have men who are also that are capable of giving something. And a lot of us aren't because we've we're giving everything that we can, but we're not giving ourselves anything. And it's like I can't give what I don't have. So it's like if I don't like myself, it's gonna be very hard for me to like other people. If I don't love myself, it's gonna be very difficult for me to love other people. If I'm spending all of my time kind of trying not to die in a physical, in a literal and a figurative way, I don't have much to give. And if I'm surrounded by people who don't have much to give, even if I don't want to be in isolation, it's very easy to be there. And it can feel safe because it's like if I'm in isolation, then I can't really get hurt. Or if I only spend time with people that think like me and act like me, then I could protect myself. But like I said, eventually it catches up to you because there isn't anybody that's going to agree with everything. And so you eventually either end up alone or you make the necessary changes to tolerate other people and hopefully go beyond just tolerate to I want to be in relationship with these people. I have compassion for them. I want the good for them as much as I want the good for myself. But that's tough to do.
You said something that really it was a nail like straight into my heart. If you're consistently trying not to die, you don't have anything left to give other people, be it your wife, your kids, your family, much less putting in the work to cultivate real brotherhood nowadays, which most guys don't even have one close friend that they can be real with. Maybe somebody that they can talk about golf with. but not like, oh, I'm really struggling with my marriage right now, or I feel like I'm really struggling as a dad. We don't have those things. And the two things that are coming together for me is sitting with your rosary. I'm a big Mala fan too. That's what led me to this. And that practice of communion and brotherhood. Surrounding yourself with the men who are going to be able to see you and to hold you and also are going to challenge you and tell you like, hey man, I like that, but I feel like you're messing up. They're going to call you up and call you out if we want to be of service to our wife, to our kids, and be able to fulfill the purpose and serve in alignment with the purpose that God put us here. Because I firmly believe that God put me here as a piece, an instrument of his purpose. It's not for me to do whatever I want. He put me here with my skills for a particular reason. And so it's my job. I think it was, who did I hear it? I heard somebody talking about that C.S. Lewis had written this, that God puts us here with talents. And it's like a mailman with a mailbag with a bunch of letters in it. Those talents aren't for him. It's his job to deliver those out and to share those. And God put me here with a particular purpose. And if I can come into alignment with him and with that purpose, then I can be that instrument of purpose. But not if I'm trying not to die, I've got nothing left to give. I'm isolated from God because I don't have a practice. I'm isolated from brotherhood and community. And then I'm also unconsciously isolated from my wife and my kids.
Yeah. Well, you said gift. What I heard right was like God created us as a gift to ourselves and others, that we are actually a gift. This was something that came to me through prayer, like it was late last week, where if I live in a state where I generally feel like I'm not good enough, which I think a lot of men feel that way most of the time, if they're willing to admit it, it's like I'm not a good enough dad, I'm not a good enough husband, I'm not a good enough employee, I'm not a good enough provider. I focus on what's wrong with me, which is where the devil wants you to be. Like, if you're not arrogant, it's like once you get past I'm the best, and it's really just a protection mechanism. But it's like when I stop believing the lie that I'm the greatest thing in the world, the next thing I want you to believe is you're the worst and you're not good enough. And here are all the reasons why you're not the good enough. And I think the reason he does that is because if I can focus on what's wrong with me, then I can't see the gifts that I have. And if he can keep me from recognizing my gifts, then I can't bless the world with the gifts that God gave me. And I feel emotional just speaking this because I've spent a lot of my life trying to fix what's wrong with me. And like there's good in that, right? Like, yes, I have things that need work. But I also have but even those weaknesses create gifts that, like, because I'm not this, I'm able to be this. And that can be a blessing if I let it be a blessing. If I can just accept that, okay, I'm not very good at this thing. But because I'm not very good at this thing, I am good at this thing. And if I'm good at this thing, I can be grateful that I have this gift. And if I let it, I can allow God to use that as an instrument and bless others with those gifts that I used to think were weaknesses that had to get fixed. But only if I shift from I'm not good enough, I have to fix everything that's wrong with me so that I'll be good enough so that people will love me and I will feel loved and feel good enough and maybe I'll get to heaven. I think a lot of people live in that space and it's exhausting. That's kind of what I mean when I say like trying not to die. It's like I'm just trying to be good enough to not suck. And if I stay in that place, then I don't get to discover my gifts, and don't, I miss the opportunities to bless others with those gifts. And that shift, it's an opportunity for us to see ourselves in our true identity, which is like a beloved child of God that has worth, not because of what we produce, but because he created us with dignity and goodness. And sometimes, I think oftentimes, just giving somebody your time and just being present with them, like our kids or a friend, not to do anything productive, but just to simply be with them, it can be a really, really wonderful gift, because a lot of my best memories are when other people have been that for me, where I just got their time to be with them, to enjoy some aspect of life with them. Those are most of my great memories. I don't have nearly the number by volume of did this thing versus spent time with these people making memories. This far outweighs the other.
And that brings us into presence. That space that you're just talking about, that ability to just sit with somebody with no agenda. That's one of the greatest gifts that we can give, because that's where relationship happens, and that's where life unfolds. And that's where being able to teach your son how to ride the bike happens.
Yeah. As I was telling you this, I got a digital picture frame to the right of my monitor, and there was a picture of my son holding up a fish that he caught in the backyard, and it just made me smile, um, because yeah, he caught a fish, but it's like he caught a fish because we've spent enough time not catching fish, not accomplishing anything, to eventually we've caught some. And what I what I smile about is just like, I enjoy those times because it's probably the most unproductive thing you could possibly do. Um, Unless you're really good at fishing, and we are not. Most of the time, you don't catch anything, and it's like you have to not care about whether or not you're going to catch something in order to spend any time fishing. And I've come to enjoy that time as intention. It's intentionally wasting time just being outside with my son who likes to
Mhm.
fish.
Yeah, it's intentional human being instead of human doing. And you can't do fishing, and you really have to be there and hope that it happens for you. Unless you're a true professional and you have all the tips and tricks.
Then it becomes work,
Yeah.
and that's, yeah, I think that's precisely why my son who enjoys fishing enjoys it, because there isn't there's no score, there's no competition. Um, it's just fun.
You said something a couple of times that I want to explore, and then we're almost at time here. But you brought up the to Jesus through Mary a few times. I wonder if you can bring us deeper into that. You talked about your rosary that led you into building your own, and I love the paracord with kids, man. I'm like, I wonder if he's tested the tensile strength here to see if the kids can hang from it. But can you bring me into to Jesus through Mary and your journey with this?
So I can't explain the theology behind it, but I don't. There are other people that can, if somebody's interested in. I can talk about my lived experience. My lived experience is when work was my idol, I started praying the rosary because I was having like mild panic attacks at work. This was right before the younger two, the twins, were born, and I wasn't having any fun. I was stressed. Work was my life, uh, and I started praying the rosary because that was the prayer I remembered. Like, it was the only thing I knew to do, that I could do, that I'd learned from childhood. And I wish I could say I loved the rosary growing up. I didn't, but I'm really glad that my parents taught me to pray the rosary because I knew the prayers. I didn't have to go learn them. And I even started with, I'm not going to meditate on the mysteries because I can't. I'm going to be thinking about work, but I'm going to say the prayers out loud. It's like, that's a pretty low bar. Like, that's a pretty lousy, like, I love you this much. I'm going to, I'm going to pray out loud and not, and think about work. But I also recognize like that's all that I could do at that time. Like that was the best that I could do at the time. And so I started praying the rosary every day on my way to work out loud, fingers on the steering wheel. Then my wife got me the rosary. And I started praying for the things around me to get better and change, work to change, family stuff to change. Right. And what happened instead was I started to change. And it wasn't like a miraculous thing where all of a sudden out of nowhere, like I just saw the light and I was holy the next day and my life changed forever that day. It's like, no, this was over several years of praying the rosary every day. Where at first I wasn't trying at all. I started to try, but it's like one thing led to another thing and another thing led to another thing. And eventually it led to my wife gave me Champions of the Rosary by Father Calloway. And he talks about the rich history of the rosary by decade, also by saint, and the miracles tied to the rosary. And by the time I was done with the book, I was like, I want to be a champion of the rosary. And also looking backwards over the past several years, it's like, oh, Mary did this. And not because Mary has any power. It's like God works through her still today as our mother. And so then I became aware of the power of the rosary. And at that point, it's like things kind of started to go faster where I started taking the rosary seriously. And then I started going to adoration. And then I started going to daily mass. And then again, reflecting back, it's like, oh, Mary brought me back to her son. She didn't leave me with her. And that's what we mean by to Jesus through Mary. That if you believe the truth about Mary, which is that she's a empty vessel from the standpoint of not my will, but your will, that she can only bring us to her son. Because loving Mary and not having a relationship with her son doesn't really get us anywhere on its own. She's never, like, if she has no pride, like if she's totally void of pride, then the only thing that she can do is bring us to her son. And so you can have a lot of confidence that if I go to Mary, Mary's going to bring me to her son. And that's what the saints talk about over the last 800 years is like the fastest way to Jesus is through Mary, which is why that's our mission. There's lots of things that we need to do as Catholics and Christians to bring people to Jesus. We've kind of narrowed in on this one little thing, which is one way that works really, really well is to get people to Mary and let Mary do the rest. And so our focus is really just providing, because there's two things that we're trying to provide: a durable rosary that does not break, because we're weak enough where if I buy a rosary and it stops working, I'm likely to not pray it anymore. Second is we try and provide beautiful rosaries because beautiful things, we are co-creators. God gave us the creative gifts that he has, right? We share in his image and likeness. And so when we create beautiful things, right, beauty draws us into the creator. And so we've found that people appreciate not just durable rosaries, but durable, beautiful rosaries, because they bring us into a deeper relationship with him in ways that things that are just utilitarian can't. And it's like, do you need a beautiful rosary in order to have a relationship with God? No, you don't even need a rosary. You have 10 fingers. but we are physical beings, and tools can be really beneficial to us. And so that's kind of where we've landed as far as what we do and why we do it.
Mm. I don't even have anything else that I need to add, man. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think about that every day, and I'll hold mine up so everybody can see it. It's the Defender. This thing is beautiful. And we have all this technology, we have all these applications for praying on your phone, but this is the OG. This is it. And this that has a bitten apple on the back of it, so I strategically have a cross over that, um, can so easily take you the other direction. And there's nothing like this. And to him, through Mary. And that's, the anxiety and panic talk hits really close to home for me, because that's why I started breathwork and meditation, and all of that led me right back here. Well, man, I think we're close to time. If you could give one parting thought, one parting piece of direction for the men listening, what might that be?
Take your time, one step at a time, and don't do it alone. So if you have people in your life, go to those people. If you don't have your people in your life, go to Mary, and she'll probably lead you to people because you're not supposed to do this alone. Um, but everything that you're carrying that you can't carry, stop carrying it. Give it to Mary, and let her. And you do the thing that you can do, and ask her to do the rest. Like she won't. She can't let you down, and you'll be a lot less stressed. And if you're not, then keep just. It's like if I can't stop being anxious, then give that to her, and just keep letting giving those things and surrendering those things until you have nothing left to surrender. Yep. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate you, man. It's been good. Feel like I don't want to sign off. We could feel like we're just getting into the nitty gritty here, but we will. Everybody that's here, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and everything that Jonathan talked about that's relevant. This most especially this beautiful rosary and the St. Francis rosary will be in the show notes. Everything that you need that we talked about will be in there. And thanks for being here. Have an
Absolutely.
uncommon day.